I still remember the way their faces drained of color, my dad's jaw tightening, my mom's hands freezing in mid-smile right after the judge laughed at the letter I handed him. It was a soft laugh, almost surprised, the kind a man makes when the truth is so different from what he expected that he can't help himself. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, "Well, this is interesting." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: vindication. The kind that hits you right in the chest. The kind that makes every sleepless night, every doubt, every lonely mile driven down Highway 1 finally mean something. But before that moment, before the judge's laugh, before my parents' stunned silence, there was everything that led me there. And it started with a phone call I wish I'd never had to receive. My name is Elena Ward, Lieutenant in the United States Navy Logistics Officer. 3 months before the hearing, I came home from deployment to the news that my grandmother Rosalind Ward had passed away. She was the woman who raised me when my parents couldn't be bothered, the woman who made sure I had shoes that fit, and lunches packed, and someone to clap when I got an award at school. She left a mark on everyone she met: shop owners in the Keys Church, friends, old Navy veterans who rented her cottages year after year. And she owned something else too: 7 small vacation homes scattered across the Florida Keys. They weren't fancy, but they were charming. Little pastel-colored places with tin roofs and hammocks out front, each one with its own story. I grew up sweeping those porches, trimming those bushes, repainting the shutters in the heat of June. Grandma always said, "These houses will take care of you someday, sweetheart. You just have to take care of them first." When I heard she was gone, my first thought after the grief was of those cottages, not because of the money, but because they were hers. They held her laughter, her recipes taped inside the kitchen cabinets, and her handwriting on every shelf that said, "Don't forget to dust." I reached out to my parents, Mark and Linda, expecting, I don't know, maybe some warmth, some sense that we had lost the same person. Instead, my dad said, "We're handling everything. No need for you to get involved." My mom added, "You're too busy with your Navy life anyway." That should have been a hint. But I let it go. I was still numb, still trying to get my bearings. I spent the first week visiting Grandma's favorite places: the church on the corner, the old bakery where she bought key lime pie, the dock behind her house where she'd sit every evening with sweet tea. People hugged me, cried with me, told me how much she meant to them. It helped. It grounded me. Then, 3 days later, I drove to my parents' house, expecting a conversation about the estate, the cottages, the funeral arrangements, anything. They sat stiffly at the dining table, a stack of folders in front of them. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We've decided to assume full ownership of the properties." I blinked. "Full ownership, Grandma always told me." "She told you nothing," my mother cut in. "You were a child." "But there's a will," I said quietly. She said there was. They exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "There is no will," my dad said, each word clipped. "The properties automatically transfer to us." I stared at him. That doesn't sound right. "It's the law," he said. "And frankly, after everything we've done for those houses, we deserve them." I almost laughed. They had done nothing. Grandma had maintained them for decades. I had helped every summer and every holiday. My parents had barely lifted a finger. Still, I tried to stay calm. Navy training teaches you that anger clouds judgment. "Can I at least see the paperwork?" I asked. My mother stood, gathered the folders, and said, "There's nothing for you to read." Then she added, "You should be grateful we're not asking you to reimburse us for the funeral." That stung. I walked out that night with a pit in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Something was missing. And most of all, where was Grandma's will? Because I knew deep in my bones that she would never leave things in chaos. She was a planner. A list maker, the kind of woman who labeled the back of every photo with who was in it and where it was taken. A week later, one of Grandma's long-term tenants slipped a plain envelope into my hand as I visited the cottages. "She told me to give you this," the woman whispered. "Said it was important." Inside was a short note in Grandma's handwriting. "If anything ever happens to me, look in the safe. You'll know what to do." A safe where she'd never mentioned one. After a little digging and a long conversation with her bank, I found it a safe deposit box under her name. And inside I found binders filled with property records, old ledgers, deposits, receipts, tenant agreements. and an unsigned copy of a will that listed me as the person she wanted to maintain the cottages and keep rent affordable. But unsigned wasn't valid, not in court. Still, it was something, a trail. I held on to that hope like a life raft. For the next month, I visited every tenant, every local friend of hers, every small business she supported. I pieced together a picture that didn't make sense because it painted my parents not as grieving children, but as people who'd been circling the estate like vultures. Every conversation, every scrap of paper, every offhand comment built the case I never thought I'd need. My grandmother's properties weren't meant to be taken by my parents. They were meant to be preserved, and they were meant for me to protect. That's how I ended up in the courtroom. That's why my dad sat there smugly. That's why my mom smirked like she'd already won. And that's why the judge laughed when he opened my letter, the one I had spent weeks assembling piece by piece, like a final salute to the woman who raised me. But that is just the beginning of the story. The morning after the hearing notice arrived in the mail, I stood in my grandmother's old kitchen, still smelling faintly of citrus cleaner and the lavender soap she loved, and felt a heaviness in my chest I hadn't known since my earliest days in Navy boot camp. There's a particular kind of weight that comes from preparing for a battle you never wanted to fight. You tell yourself you're strong enough, disciplined enough, trained enough. But family wounds have a way of knocking the wind out of you in ways a drill instructor never could. I leaned against the counter, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. It was the same fridge Grandma had since the late 90s, still covered in faded magnets from all 50 states. One of them, a little Pelican from Key Largo, was crooked, and I reached up to straighten it. That tiny motion brought back a memory of her soft voice saying, "Everything looks better when it's lined up just right, sweetheart." She was right. She always was. But nothing about my life felt lined up now. My parents hadn't spoken a word to me since the confrontation in their dining room. My brother Kyle had sent me one text message. "You're ruining everything. Stop." Just that. No punctuation, no explanation. It wasn't unusual for him to be vague. Kyle had spent most of his adult life drifting between half-finished jobs and bad habits. But this felt different, almost like a warning, or a threat. I deleted the message and slid my phone into my pocket. I drove to the cottages that afternoon, determined to take inventory of everything I could still control. The sun hung low over the water, shimmering on the horizon like a sheet of hammered gold. It was the kind of beautiful day Grandma loved. She would have stood out here with her iced tea and said something like, "See, even when the world's upside down, the keys stay steady." But the keys didn't feel steady now. As I walked the gravel path between the cottages, I noticed things I had overlooked before: freshly replaced gutters that my parents had claimed as their expense, a new AC unit on Cottage 4, and a pile of unused lumber near Cottage 6. I hadn't approved any of it. Had my parents really taken over the maintenance, and with what money? One of the long-term tenants, a soft-spoken retired Coast Guard man named Frank, came out onto his porch and lifted a hand. "Lieutenant Ward," he greeted me with a small nod. He always used my rank not out of formality but respect. I walked up the steps. "Afternoon, Frank." He studied my face for only a second before sighing. "You all right? You look like someone stole your compass." I sat on the top step beside him. Maybe they did. He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "Your grandma told me more than she told most folks. She didn't trust your parents to handle these places. Said they didn't understand people, only money." Hearing it out loud stung. Did she ever mention signing a will? Frank hesitated. She mentioned meeting with someone, said it was to make things official. After that, she seemed relieved. Official. That word echoed in my mind. If she had completed the will, why wasn't it anywhere? Who would benefit from it disappearing? I thanked Frank and continued my walk, feeling a storm of questions building. Near Cottage 7, I saw a figure I didn't expect: my father. He was talking to a man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard, a real estate agent. My father spotted me and stiffened. The agent followed his gaze, then gave a polite nod and walked off toward his car. Dad's jaw moved slightly, the way it always did when he was irritated, but pretending he wasn't. "What was that?" I asked. "None of your business," he replied. "We're evaluating options." "Options for what?" "The future." He brushed his hands off as if he were wiping dust that wasn't there. These places need real management, Elena, not some Navy fantasy. I stared at him. You're trying to sell them. He didn't deny it. They're ours. We can do what we want. My voice tightened. You're acting like Grandma didn't exist. He blinked, eyes momentarily softening, but only for a breath. She didn't understand how much responsibility these places are. She didn't know what she was asking for. She knew exactly what she was asking for, I said quietly. She trusted me. Dad scoffed. She trusted you because she spoiled you. I nearly laughed. Me spoiled, I'd earned every inch of my life in sweat and discipline. But I didn't say that. There was no point. He turned to walk away but paused. Drop the hearing, Elena. It's embarrassing. I stood there stunned as he got into his truck and drove off. The smell of dust lingered in the air after he left, mixing with the salt breeze in a way that made the back of my throat tighten. I called my attorney as soon as I got into my car. Her name was Andrea Wallace, a sharp but patient woman who had spent 20 years handling estate disputes across Florida. When I explained what I'd just witnessed, her voice sharpened instantly. They're preparing to liquidate the properties, she said. We need to act fast. But without a signed will. You don't need the entire will, Andrea said. You need proof there was one and that it was tampered with. That word again, proof. A few days later, I visited the local church where Grandma had volunteered for years. The pastor, a gentle man with kind eyes, welcomed me into his office. Your grandmother left something with me, he said, reaching into a locked drawer. She said it was just in case someone tried to rewrite her story. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were a handwritten note from Grandma, a copy of an earlier partially signed will, a notarized letter stating her intent to leave me managerial rights over all 7 homes, and a list of beneficiary instructions. But the last item stopped my breath. A photocopy of a notary logbook entry listing the date, time, and witness names for the signing of her final will. My heart raced. Pastor, I whispered, this is everything. He nodded. She trusted you for a reason. That night I sat at Grandma's old table with every document spread out before me. I felt the weight of her love, her planning, her belief in fairness. This wasn't about money, it never had been. It was about her legacy and the truth she wanted protected. I knew then what I had to do. The hearing wasn't just necessary, it was inevitable. The following week became a blur of miles on the car, cups of lukewarm coffee and long conversations with people who had loved my grandmother in ways my parents never understood. If part 2 was about realizing something was wrong, part 3 was where every loose thread started tightening slowly, quietly, but unmistakably, into a rope strong enough to pull the truth right into daylight. I began at the church. It was the natural starting point, Grandma's second home, the place where she'd baked pies for fundraisers and knitted blankets for newborns, and dropped off half the vegetables from her garden just because someone might need them. I walked into the fellowship hall that Tuesday afternoon, and half a dozen older women immediately stood up, arms open. Elena, honey, said Mrs. Parker, hugging me tight. Your grandma would be so proud you're fighting for her. I hadn't realized how tired I looked until that moment. There's a certain comfort that only older women can give, the kind that settles your spirit before it settles your body. They sat me down, gave me a mug of hot tea, and put out a plate of lemon bars that tasted exactly like the ones Grandma used to make. We heard what your parents are trying to do, one of them whispered. Your grandma told us years ago she didn't trust them with the cottages. Not even a little. I felt that comment like a weight inside my chest. Did she ever talk about signing a final will? Oh yes, Mrs. Parker said, nodding firmly. She told us she had an appointment with a notary, said she was relieved to finally make it official. Those were her exact words. Official again, always that word. She had said it to me too. So why was there no signed will? Why was the only version the one hidden away unsigned in a safe deposit box my parents never mentioned? The women encouraged me to talk to a man named Samuel Rourke, a retired notary who lived just a few streets from the church. He's in his 80s, they said, sharp as ever. He knew your grandmother well. I knocked on his door that afternoon. A tall, white-haired man answered, leaning slightly on a cane, but with eyes still bright as polished glass. Lieutenant Ward, he greeted me before I even introduced myself. I heard you might be coming. He invited me inside, insisting I sit in the recliner because that thing cost more than my first car and someone ought to enjoy it. His humor put me at ease. "Sir," I began, "I was told you may have helped my grandmother with a will." He folded his hands on his lap and nodded. "Yes. She called me 1 week before she passed, said she wanted you to have oversight of the cottages because you understood people, not just numbers." We met at her kitchen table. She had her documents ready. She signed the final will right in front of me. My breath caught. She signed it. "Oh yes," he said, tapping the side of his head. "Clear as day. I logged it like any other notarization. She had 2 witnesses, neighbors of hers. Good folks." I stamped the document myself. "Do you still have the logbook?" I asked. He paused, then stood and shuffled to a bookshelf. He pulled out an old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed around the edges. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "Page 72. I opened it carefully. There it was. Her name, the date, the time, the 2 witness signatures, his notary seal, clear, undeniable, final. Tears stung the back of my eyes, not of sadness but of relief, so powerful it felt like my ribs couldn't hold it. "Mr. Rourke," I whispered, "this means everything." He patted my hand. "I know, that's why I kept the book handy. Something told me you'd need it." I left his house with a photocopy of the logbook entry, my hands trembling slightly because I understood exactly what it meant. The will existed. The will was signed, and it had gone missing after her death. That wasn't an accident. Someone removed it. Someone benefited from its disappearance. And I suddenly knew exactly who had the most to gain. I called my attorney Andrea as soon as I got into my car. She answered on the first ring. "Elena, any luck today?" "You need to hear this," I said. I explained everything, the notary's confirmation, the witnesses, the logbook stamp. Andrea went silent for a long moment. "Elena," she finally said, voice low, "this is huge. This isn't just suspicion anymore. This is evidence of a destroyed will. That's a serious allegation." "I know," I murmured, "and I'm beginning to think my parents knew exactly what they were doing." Andrea exhaled slowly. "We're going to need affidavits from the witnesses and the notary. Get them as soon as possible. I'll help facilitate." I hung up, heart pounding, and started driving back toward the cottages. But halfway there my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered. "Elena." It was the pastor. "I found something else in the church storage. Something your grandmother left behind. I think you need to see it." I turned my car around immediately. When I arrived, he led me into a small office stacked with cardboard boxes. From one of them, he pulled out a heavy manila envelope sealed with clear tape. My grandmother's handwriting curled across the front. "For Elena, if anything happens." Inside were decades of rent ledgers, notes about each tenant, copies of correspondence with her lawyer, and most hauntingly a letter addressed directly to me. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. "My dear Elena, if you are reading this, I could not finish what I wanted to. I trust you with the cottages because they are not just properties. They are the stories of every person who stayed to find peace. Protect them, and be wary of those who want what they did not earn." I swallowed hard, my chest tightened. This wasn't just an estate. This was her legacy, and she knew somehow that my parents would try to take what they had never nurtured. As I drove home that evening, the weight of it all pressed against me. The sun was setting over the bay, washing the sky with oranges and purples that looked almost painted. Grandma always said sunsets were God's way of reminding us that endings can still be beautiful. But this ending wasn't here yet, and before things could get better, the truth had to come out. The cottage porches glowed in the dusk as I pulled up each one, looking more like a promise than a building. I held the envelope close, knowing tomorrow would be a turning point. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt like I wasn't walking blind. I had proof, I had purpose, and I had her voice guiding me forward. The next morning I woke before sunrise, not because of an alarm, but because my Navy instincts kicked in. Years of deployment had trained my body to snap awake when something serious needed to be done. And that day, everything felt serious. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just paperwork. It was the backbone of a story my parents had tried to erase. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt steady, focused, ready. My attorney Andrea had told me to meet her at her office in Key Largo at 9. I arrived 10 minutes early, coffee in hand, wearing my service khakis. Not because I needed to, but because it reminded me who I was, someone who didn't run, didn't lie, didn't fold. Andrea's office was small and simple, filled with bookshelves and framed certificates. When she walked in, she was holding a yellow legal pad and a pen tucked behind her ear. "Good morning, Lieutenant," she said. "You look like someone ready to take on Congress." "Just my family," I replied. She laughed just once and motioned for me to sit. "Let's get to work. What you brought me yesterday changed everything." She spread the documents across her desk, the photocopy of the notary's logbook, the pastor's envelope, the earlier drafts of the will. She handled each page with the care of someone working on a puzzle with missing edges. "Elena," she said carefully, "you need to understand how significant this is. Florida law is strict about wills. But when a signed will disappears under suspicious circumstances, especially when the beneficiaries suddenly take control of the assets, courts take it very seriously." "You mean, it's considered fraud?" "In some cases," she said, "yes, even criminal fraud." I leaned back, letting her words settle. Fraud, my parents, my own family. I didn't want to believe it. Even after everything, some part of me hoped there was a misunderstanding, a misplacement, an oversight. But as Andrea continued explaining, the picture became clearer. "They filed paperwork immediately without giving you access. They claimed there was no will. They began making financial decisions that only the lawful inheritor could make. And you caught your father meeting with a real estate agent." I winced, I know. Andrea tapped her pen against her notepad. "I've seen dozens of cases. Families fracture over far less than 7 properties in the Florida Keys. This isn't rare, Elena, it's just painful." I nodded, absorbing that. "What's our next move?" "Affidavits," she said. "From the notary, from the witnesses, from the pastor. Once we have sworn statements, we present everything at the hearing. The judge will likely halt all sales, all transfers, all income distribution." "And my parents will fight," I said quietly. "They will," she agreed, "and you need to be prepared for that." I looked out the window at the parking lot, at the palm trees swaying lightly in the wind. "I'm Navy. I'm prepared." She smiled faintly. "Good. Because this isn't just a legal case, it's a test of character, yours and theirs." The next few days were a whirlwind of signatures, notary stamps, and witness recollections. Mr. Rourke signed his affidavit with trembling hands but steady eyes. The neighbors who served as witnesses confirmed the exact day Grandma had gathered them. The pastor wrote a carefully worded statement about Grandma's intentions. Every piece fit. Every word supported the truth. Meanwhile, my parents acted as if everything were normal. My father continued managing the cottages as though nothing had changed, giving instructions to handymen, posting online ads for future bookings, and holding family meetings without me. Kyle, on the other hand, became increasingly erratic. One evening, as I was locking up Cottage 3, he pulled into the gravel lot with his headlights blinding me. He stepped out of the truck, eyes unfocused, shoulders tensed. "What are you doing, Elena?" he demanded. "I'm doing what Grandma would have wanted," I said calmly. He pointed a shaky finger at me. "You're trying to take everything. Everything she worked for." "No," I replied. "I'm trying to preserve it." "You think you're better than us because you're Navy," he snapped. "You think your uniform makes you right." "No," I said quietly, "but lying makes you wrong." He flinched like the words hit something raw inside him, then slammed his truck door and drove off so fast, gravel spit into the trees. I stood alone in the dark, breathing in the humid night air, letting the sting of the moment dissolve. I felt sadness more than anger. Sadness for the boy Kyle used to be. The big brother who'd carried me on his shoulders at the county fair. The teenager who taught me how to fish. The man who'd gotten lost somewhere along the road. I whispered into the night, "Grandma, I hope I'm doing this right." 2 days later, I received a letter from the court confirming the hearing date. Andrea and I reviewed everything again at her office. "Elena," she said as she handed me a thick folder, "this is your case. It's strong, stronger than most." I held the folder, feeling its weight, as heavy as responsibility, as light as hope. "Are you ready?" she asked. I thought about my Navy training again, about facing storms at sea, difficult leaders, impossible schedules, and long deployments. Yet none of those things had shaken me as deeply as this battle with my own family. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Andrea gave a small nod. Good. Walk in with your head high. Speak only when addressed. Answer clearly and calmly. The judge will notice. And my parents, I asked. She exhaled. They'll try to rattle you. Stay composed. Truth is on your side. I smiled slightly. Truth and paperwork. She laughed. That too. That night I sat on the porch of Grandma's main house. The air was warm, tinged with the smell of salt and hibiscus. I looked at the cottages, each one glowing softly in the evening light, and felt her presence everywhere. The chimes on the front porch jingled gently in the breeze. The hammock swayed empty but familiar. Grandma used to say, integrity is the quiet kind of strength. Most people won't see it, but everyone feels it. I repeated those words under my breath. When I finally stood, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The truth was on my side. The law was on my side. And most importantly, Grandma was on my side. I went inside, turned off the lights, and whispered into the darkness. I'm ready for the hearing, ready to finish what you started. I arrived at the courthouse earlier than necessary, old Navy habits. I liked having time to stand still before walking into a battle, to feel the ground under my boots, to breathe in the air, and remind myself I was there for a reason. The sun was barely stretching over the courthouse roof when I walked up the steps, folder tucked under my arm, uniform pressed and sharp. Inside, the air conditioning hummed over polished floors and rows of wooden benches that had probably held decades of family disputes just like mine. A bailiff with a friendly mustache nodded at me. Ma'am, he said with quiet respect. I nodded back. I didn't feel strong, but something about being recognized for my service steadied my nerves. Andrea arrived moments later, dressed in a dark suit and carrying a briefcase full of our evidence. She looked calm, calmer than I felt. You ready? She asked. I exhaled, as ready as I'll ever be. When the courtroom doors opened, my parents were already inside. My father sat confidently in the front row, legs crossed, one arm casually stretched over the bench, as if he were about to watch a show. My mother sat beside him, smoothing her skirt with exaggerated calm. Kyle leaned against the back wall, arms folded, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. His left foot tapped restlessly, a sign of nerves or guilt. None of them looked at me. Andrea leaned in. Remember, do not react. Let their behavior speak for itself. We took our seats at the petitioner's table. The judge entered and everyone rose. He was an older man with silver hair and clear blue eyes, the kind of judge who looked like he'd seen every possible family mess cross his bench. Please be seated, he said. The courtroom settled. Today's case involves the estate of Rosalind Ward. He began scanning the docket. Allegations of disputed inheritance, potential document destruction, and unlawful transfer of assets. My father straightened proudly. The judge adjusted his glasses. We'll begin with the respondents. My father stood smiling. Your Honor, the 7 vacation homes in the Florida Keys belong to us. There is no will. They were passed to me and my wife by right. My mother nodded. Our daughter is trying to stir up trouble. She doesn't deserve a cent. The judge blinked once, slowly, almost like he was absorbing the audacity of their statements. Thank you, he said. Please sit. Then he turned to me. Ms. Ward, you submitted an envelope before this hearing. Please step forward. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, but my feet carried me with the ease of someone walking onto a parade deck. I handed him the letter, the carefully prepared packet Andrea and I had assembled. The judge opened it, pulled out the documents, and began scanning through the pages. The room felt like it held its breath. He read the notarized logbook entry. He read the pastor's letter. He read the affidavits from the witnesses. He flipped through the copies of Grandma's earlier wills, the rent ledgers, the correspondence. Then he stopped on one page, his eyebrows lifted. He read it again, then again. And he laughed. Not mocking, not cruel. A soft, surprised laugh. The laugh of a man who had just watched a tower of falsehood come crashing down. My parents stiffened. The judge leaned forward, tapped a finger on the page, and said quietly, almost conversationally, Well, this is interesting. Everything inside the courtroom shifted. My father's confidence evaporated in an instant. My mother's smile crumbled. Kyle's foot stopped tapping. The judge cleared his throat. According to the evidence provided, he said a final will was indeed signed and notarized by the decedent. Witnessed. Logged. The disappearance of that will, coupled with immediate attempts to assume property control, raises serious questions, potentially criminal ones. My father's face went pale. My mother gripped the bench so tightly her knuckles whitened. However, the judge continued, the purpose of this hearing is not to determine criminal charges at this moment, but to ascertain rightful management of the estate. He looked toward me. Ms. Ward, please explain in your own words your grandmother's intentions for these properties. I swallowed, steadied myself, and spoke. My grandmother raised me, I said. These cottages weren't just buildings to her. They were homes for people who needed rest, healing, or a break from hard times. She wanted them kept affordable. She told me that since I was a teenager. She said I understood the people who stayed there. I paused. She trusted me. The judge nodded slowly. The documents seemed to support that. He turned to my parents. Do either of you have an explanation for the missing will? My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked confused, angry, cornered. My mother reached for his hand, but he pulled away, eyes darting from the judge to the documents to me. The judge waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds, no answer. He sighed. Given the circumstances, I am issuing an immediate order to halt any sale, transfer, or modification of the 7 properties. Furthermore, temporary managerial authority will be granted to Ms. Ward until further proceedings. My mother gasped. She's lying. The judge raised a hand. Enough. You will speak through counsel. Andrea leaned toward me. This is the best outcome possible for today. But the judge wasn't done. He removed his glasses and looked at my parents with an expression I can only describe as disappointment. Family disputes are painful, he said. But attempting to override a legally signed will is unacceptable. I strongly advise all parties to consider mediation before this escalates further. My parents sat frozen, pale, and motionless. The judge stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. For a moment the entire room stayed still. Even the dust motes seemed suspended in the sunlight. Then Kyle moved first, storming out without a word. My mother rose shakily, refusing to meet my eyes. My father lingered a second longer, staring at me with something between fear and regret. And me. I exhaled the deepest breath I'd taken in months. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was truth laid out plain as day. A foundation I could stand on. A turning point Grandma would have understood. The courthouse parking lot was already thinning out by the time I stepped outside. People drifted to their cars in quiet clusters, murmuring about their own hearings, their own families, their own troubles. Meanwhile, I stood still beneath the fading Florida sun, feeling something I hadn't felt since the day Grandma died, clarity. Andrea walked beside me, heels tapping softly on the pavement. That was a turning point, she said. The judge's reaction speaks volumes. I nodded, but my mind wasn't on the judge. It was on my parents, on the way their faces drained of color, as the truth was read out loud. You grow up thinking parents are infallible pillars, but sometimes they're just people, flawed, frightened, and capable of disappointing you in ways you never imagined. We reached my car before Andrea turned to me. There'll be mediation, she said. He made that clear. I know, I replied. She paused. You need to decide what you want the outcome to be, Elena, not legally, emotionally. She said it like she already sensed the struggle in my chest. Think on it, she added, then headed to her car. I sat in mine for a long minute, staring through the windshield. The palm trees swayed gently along the courthouse steps. The world didn't look different, but I did. 2 days later, mediation was scheduled. It wasn't in a courtroom, just a plain conference room with beige walls and a long wooden table. A carafe of coffee sat in the middle, untouched. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and old carpet. Funny how the battles that shape your life don't always happen in dramatic places. My parents arrived before me. Dad sat stiffly, tie perfectly straight, his chin lifted in stubborn pride. Mom avoided my eyes entirely, keeping her gaze fixed on a framed painting of a beach someone probably bought at a garage sale. Kyle didn't show up. That didn't surprise me. Andrea placed our folder on the table. Across from us, their attorney, a tired-looking man with thinning hair, stacked his papers neatly. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, began with practiced calm. We're here today to discuss a path forward regarding the disputed properties of Rosalind Ward. My father interrupted almost immediately. "This is unnecessary. We didn't destroy anything. That notary must be confused." Andrea remained still, her voice even. 3 witnesses, 3 affidavits, and a notary stamp that matches the date your wife filed her inheritance claim. Mom flinched. The mediator lifted a hand. "Let's keep this civil. Mr. and Mrs. Ward, your daughter provided substantial evidence." Dad's jaw ticked. Those cottages were meant for the family. "They were," I said softly. "Grandma intended them to be managed, not sold." Mom finally spoke, her voice thin. "We needed the money, Elena." I blinked. "Money you never said." Dad snapped, "It wasn't your concern." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw not a villain, but a frightened, aging man, trying to cling to control of a life that hadn't turned out the way he expected. He wasn't cruel by nature, but desperation twists people. "What happened?" I asked, gentler now. Mom's shoulders sagged. "Your father retired early. Kyle needed loans. We got behind. The cottages looked like the only solution." Dad closed his eyes as if that admission hurt him more than the hearing. "And you didn't tell me," I whispered. "You were gone," he said. "Always gone. Navy deployments, overseas bases. We didn't want to worry you." The irony hit me hard. They'd shut me out to protect me, and in doing so created the very fight they feared. The mediator leaned forward. "Elena, do you want to respond?" I took a slow breath. "I want the cottages managed the way Grandma intended, affordable, cared for, steady. I want the rental income reinvested into upkeep, and I want them protected from being sold off." Dad scoffed. "And where does that leave us?" "Not cut out," I said, "not punished." They looked at me confused. I continued, "A small stipend, enough to keep you afloat, paid from the cottage revenue. But I take over management legally, fully. No sales, no real estate agents, no secret deals." Andrea shot me a quick glance, surprised but impressed. Mom whispered, "You'd do that after everything." "I'm Navy," I said simply. "I don't turn my back on family, even when they turn theirs on me." The room fell silent. The mediator wrote notes slowly, then nodded. "This is a workable compromise." Dad stared at the table. "What about Kyle?" I swallowed. "Kyle isn't my responsibility. But if he wants help, I'll support him getting treatment." Dad's expression cracked, not broken, but softened, like a man realizing his daughter was stronger than he'd ever given her credit for. Mom wiped her eyes. The mediator finalized the terms. Andrea reviewed the language. Their attorney sighed with visible relief. Then the mediator asked the question, "No courtroom ever forces, but every family needs. Is there anything you'd like to say to each other before we conclude?" My mom looked at me first. "We weren't fair to you." Dad swallowed. I knew your grandmother trusted you. I should have trusted you too." I nodded. "Then start now." He nodded back. Not a perfect ending, but a beginning. Outside the building, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in weeks. The breeze carried the scent of mangroves from the nearby bay. Andrea exhaled deeply. "You handled that impressively," she said. "Most people want revenge. You wanted resolution." "I wanted peace," I replied. "Grandma deserved that. And maybe I do too." Andrea held out her hand. "Congratulations, Lieutenant, you did the right thing." As she drove away, I stood beneath the wide Florida sky and let the weight of the past months settle. Not crushing anymore, just present, like a memory that shapes you without breaking you. The cottages were safe. My parents were humbled, not ruined. Kyle, well, his path was still uncertain. But mine, for the first time in a long time, it felt clear. The first morning I woke up with full legal management of the cottages, the Florida Keys sunrise felt different, more personal somehow. The sky stretched open in soft shades of peach and gold, and as the light filtered through the slats of Grandma's old blinds, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years settle behind my ribs. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, steadier. Peace, maybe. Or closure. Or the start of something that finally felt like my own. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, the tile cool beneath my feet, and poured myself a cup of coffee. Grandma's old mug, the one with the chipped handle and the faded picture of a pelican, sat waiting in the cabinet exactly where she always kept it. I took it down, filled it, and stepped out onto the porch. From there, I could see all 7 cottages, pastel blues, greens, and yellows glowing in the early light. A few tenants were already outside, an older couple sipping coffee on their porch swing, a young veteran stretching on the steps of Cottage 3, and the retired Coast Guard man, Frank, watering his potted tomatoes like he did every morning. They waved. I waved back. It felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a purpose. After everything that happened, it would have been easy to turn bitter or cold, but bitterness never healed anything. It just rotted the inside of a story that deserved to grow. I walked down the steps and made my morning rounds, checking the gutters, sweeping stray leaves, greeting tenants like old friends. This was the life Grandma built, simple, honest, anchored in service. And now it was mine to protect. Around mid-morning, as I was repainting the porch railing on Cottage 4, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see my parents standing at the base of the steps. They looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just quieter, humble, like people who had survived their own storm. "Morning," I said, setting the paintbrush in its tray. My mother cleared her throat. We didn't want to interrupt. "You're not," I replied, though the truth was I still felt the old tension rise in my shoulders. Healing wasn't instant. It was practice, a choice. Dad nodded at the cottage. "Looks good." "Thank you," I said. There was a long pause. Then Mom spoke, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "We wanted to say thank you. For not ruining us." I leaned against the porch railing. I never wanted to ruin anyone. "We know," she whispered. Dad shifted his weight. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you pushed harder in court. God knows I deserved worse." I studied him for a moment. His eyes were tired in the way men get when they've spent too long holding on to pride like it's armor. "I just wanted Grandma's wishes honored," I said gently. "That's all." He nodded, jaw tightening with emotion he wasn't used to showing. "She trusted you. I should have too." Mom touched his arm. "We've been talking about making things right, about helping where we can, maybe volunteering, maybe even coming by now and then to see if you need a hand." I smiled, not wide, not forced, just real. "You're welcome here, but the cottages won't be sold. Not ever." Dad let out a breath that sounded like acceptance. "We understand." As they walked away hand in hand, something I hadn't seen since I was a child, I felt a knot inside me loosen. Not fully, but enough. Enough to believe that reconciliation wasn't just a word. It was possible. Earned. Slow. But possible. Later that afternoon, I found Kyle sitting on the edge of the dock behind Grandma's house, feet dangling over the water. I hadn't expected him to be here. He stared out across the shimmering bay shoulders, stiff face blank. I sat beside him without saying anything. Sometimes silence is the only bridge between broken siblings. After a long few minutes, he said quietly, "I'm checking into a program. A real one. Not the fake stuff I told you about." I looked at him surprised but hopeful. "That's good, Kyle." He swallowed hard. "I messed up. I know that. I got lost for a long time." I nudged his shoulder lightly. "Then find your way back." He let out a shaky breath. "I don't deserve your help." "That's fine," I said softly. "Sometimes you help because it's deserved. Sometimes you help because it's needed." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You're too good, you know that." I laughed once. "No, just stubborn." We sat there a while longer watching the sun dance across the water, and for the first time in years I felt like maybe, just maybe, my family wasn't broken beyond repair. The next few weeks unfolded easily, almost gently. I hired a local handyman, restored the gardens, repainted the shutters, and worked on updating the rental system so long-term tenants could stay without fear of sudden hikes. Word spread fast that Rosalind's cottages were being cared for again, and former tenants returned to visit like old friends. Every night I wrote a few lines in a small journal, something Grandma used to do. On the last page I copied her handwritten words from the letter she left me. "Protect them, and be wary of those who want what they did not earn." But beneath it in my own handwriting I added, "Forgive when possible, heal when you can, lead with integrity." One evening, while watching another breathtaking sunset from the porch, I felt an idea forming in my heart, gentle but certain. A message. Something I wished people would carry with them after hearing my story. So I walked inside, and recorded a few lines for the audio channel where I'd been sharing my experiences. When I finished, I listened back. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here with me. My grandmother believed that honor wasn't about medals or titles. It was about choosing truth even when it costs you, and choosing kindness even when it hurts. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a little reminder of what family can be. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be grateful if you stayed with me. We still have so many lessons to learn together. I smiled to myself. Not every story gets a perfect ending, but this one got an honest one. And that, I think, would have made Grandma proud.